F4K and F4M Phantoms were the two British derivatives of the infamous McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom II series of aircraft. Unlike its other fixed-wing counterpart on the deck of HMS Ark Royal, the Phantom was bought rather than designed and produced through MOD requirement, albeit begrudgingly into UK military service in 1968. Today we'll be having an overview of the aircraft's history, usage and ultimate fate in British use. The now aging Sea Vixens of the Fleet Air Arm were approaching their end of life, and the Admiralty were keen to replace it with a supersonic VTOL-style aircraft, coded P1154RN. This was simply a navalised version of the P1154 that the RAF were wanting to use to replace its aging Hawker Hunter fleet. Sadly, this design was estimated for delivery in 1968, which was a bit too late for the Royal Navy. As with many British projects of the period, a new Labour government was voted into power, and as a result many defence projects were thrust into the crosshair of the budget cut rifle now shouldered in Westminster. Both versions of P1145 were cancelled, and to add salt to the wound for the RAF, so was TSR2. This left both forces with a small issue of not having an up-to-date aircraft to bring into service. But thankfully for them, some very nice American gentlemen popped into Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton with a shiny new aircraft, the F4B Phantom II, conveniently with documents titled with names such as F4 in Royal Navy service, and then really hammering home the benefit of having the F4 over the cancelled British projects. The main one is that, well, they're ready to take right now. Both forces saw the writing on the wall, and as a result the MOD bit the bullet and ordered the F4. Ever to do it our own way, we managed to negotiate a re-engining deal and fitted them with the ever-potent Rolls-Royce Spey engine. As well as that, the British were allowed to produce certain parts of the aircraft closer to home. For example, BAC, British Aerospace Corporation, would build the rear fuselage, and Ferranti would build the radar. With the deal now signed, the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm would receive the F4K, and the Royal Air Force would receive the F4M. Both were based on the current F4J, currently in US service. On paper, the Speys looked like a fantastic idea, as they packed more power and were more fuel efficient than the out-of-the-box J79s normally fitted. But as with many things, it is not as easy as unplug one engine and plug in another. The engine bays and rear fuselage had to be modified by enlarging them and pointing them down a touch. This would help with the takeoff power, but conversely need more airflow as a result too, meaning the intakes had to be enlarged and auxiliary intake doors had to be added on the fuselage just forward of the tail. All these changes were so expensive that this off-the-shelf procurement was turning into a very protracted and expensive affair. As well as that, all of the benefits provided by the Speys were virtually negated by the increased drag induced by the larger rear fuselage. Whilst low-level acceleration was improved, the British Phantoms were outperformed by American F4Js at altitude, but at least the Speys were not as smoky, making visual acquisition that little bit harder. The F4K needed to be made compatible with the Royal Navy carriers too, as they were particularly small when compared to their US counterparts. The radome, for example, had to be able to fold back 180 degrees just to fit on the aircraft lifts. Other additions included the extendable nose-leg strut to further aid in taking off, as well as larger control surfaces and slatted tailplanes. All of this was seen as rather unnecessary by the Royal Air Force, as they did not need their Phantoms to be flung off the front of an aircraft carrier on a regular basis. In their mind, the spare cash could have helped make a bigger order. The first three examples of the F4K, or the FG1 as I will call it now from onwards, were delivered to Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton in April of 1968 and were formed into 700p Intensive Flying Trials Unit, with another 3 airframes joining the unit later into the year. 9 months later, after initial trials were completed to a sufficient standard, an official training squadron was to be commissioned. This would be 767 Naval Air Squadron. For those who passed through the intensive Phantom FG1 training, they would then be passed to 892 Naval Air Squadron, which was formed in March of 1969. Only 28 airframes were available to the Navy, and so there would be only one frontline squadron, 892, one training squadron, 767, and one trials unit, 700p, in the Navy's arsenal. During the period that 892 had to be worked up, 700p went through carrier trials on HMS Eagle and the USS Saratoga, which was not a nice experience for the Americans. The deck plating of the Saratoga was not rated for the increased power pushed out by the Speys, and as a result left burnt and deformed deck plating in its wake, something that was prepared for on both Eagle and Ark Royal, but only the latter would actually receive the requisite upgrade package of water-cooled blast deflectors and deck plating. The Phantom's first appearance to the British public in MOD use was the 1968 Farnborough Air Show, with the huge power of 2 reheating spades behind it, an impression was certainly left. In a similar turn of events for the Navy as found in the Buccaneer programme, the plans to operate a fleet of 140 Phantoms was scuppered when the carrier modernisation programmes and the CVA-01 supercarrier programmes were binned. Only Ark Royal would soldier on into the 70s, and thus the order of Phantom FG1s would be slimmed down to 48, with 20 of this first batch actually being delivered to the Royal Air Force. The Navy started receiving Phantoms in the ever-famous RAF green and grey colour schemes. How bizarre! 892 Naval Air Squadron made the assumption that they would be the last fixed-wing type to equip the Fleet Air Arm. Not quite true, as the Sea Harrier was introduced in 1980, and thus marked their Phantoms with a suitably large Omega symbol embossed on a large vertical stabiliser, which I must say looks rather good. So, the Phantom had now been brought into service with both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. Maybe procured for the worst reasons, but with the best intentions in mind, the order was now being fulfilled. One admiral went as far to ask as, has it been delivered upside down? From that comment alone, you might have grasped that some people thought the Phantom was not a looker, proven by the fact it had the nickname Double Ugly. I simply can't relate. Most Fleet Air Arm Phantom activity at this point was taking place out of Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton on their mock carrier deck, but some actual deck flying was squeezed in on HMS Eagle before her retirement. 892 Naval Air Squadron were in the spotlight briefly for their breaking of the world record flight time across the Atlantic from New York to London in a mere 4 hours, 46 minutes and 57 seconds. Once HMS Ark Royal's modernisation programme was completed in 1970, 892 Naval Air Squadron were embarked and serious operational flying could actually begin. Phantoms from 767 also visited the ship at times, but they were disbanded soon after as training had been handed over to the RAF in 1972. As well as Royal Navy Phantoms moving home to RAF Lou Charles from Yeovilton. The RAF had been very busy in this period too, forming a whole new set of Phantom squadrons at RAF Coningsby. 228 Operational Conversion Unit was first in August of 1968, followed by 6, 54 and 41 Squadron in the year after. As the world turned into the 70s, Royal Air Force Germany would see its own squadrons being formed, such as 14 and 17 at RAF Bruggen. Whilst the Phantom in Germany were only minutes from the border, it was the English Electric Lightnings who would continue to guard the frontier from the Soviet bomber threat. This meant the Phantoms were primarily tasked with ground attack, interdiction and reconnaissance. The recce part of the FGR2 tag for the RAF Phantoms was a bit of a misnomer, as only 30-ish Phantoms in the whole fleet were actually equipped with the correct wiring to use the large EMI reconnaissance pod. As time went on, it was increasingly clear that the Phantom was much better suited to defending UK airspace than the now ageing English Electric Lightning, and with surprising success of the Jaguar programme, RAF Germany's Phantoms began to be sent back to the UK to be retasked with air defence, while the Jaguars took over reconnaissance and strike roles in Germany. Not to go quietly, the Phantom would get a revenge of sorts when one Phantom decided to shoot down a Jaguar over Germany with an AIM-9G Sidewinder. Of course, it was an accident, so the story goes in 1982. Link in the description. This time was truly the peak of UK Phantom operations.
Up in the air, Phantom's about 10 miles away. The Phantom's about 2.5 miles, let's go the other way, 100 metre water side. 02 is at 2.5 miles on 502.
Hook down, you won't be retarded. You'll just go round again and get used to just flying the deck.
1978 saw the final withdrawal of the Royal Navy Phantom FG1s, and with HMS Ark-Royals' departure to the scrapyard, the remaining Phantoms of 892 Naval Air Squadron were then passed into RAF hands at 111 Squadron, who would defend UK airspace from RAF Luchars. 1982 rolled around and the RAF's ability to defend the Royal Navy fleet was to be proven nonsense when the military junta of Argentina invaded the British Falkland Islands. With HMS Ark-Royal already reduced to saucepans and fencing, there was no way to get UK air power in the area until the Royal Navy Harrier carriers, HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible reached the combat zone. The closest the RAF could get was defending the tiny UK staging post of Ascension Island. The Phantoms lacked the range to get down to the Falklands in one sensible jump. The irony of scrapping the last of the Royal Navy big carriers would soon hit home on the penny counters at Whitehall, as it would not only cost them many expensive ships such as HMS Antelope and Atlantic Conveyor, but the lives of many servicemen too. With victory achieved in the South Atlantic, the airbase at Port Stanley was upgraded to enable a proper RAF Phantom presence, whilst a new RAF station at Mount Pleasant was being built up. 23 Squadron moved down to the Falklands and took over from the current hosts of a flight from 29 Squadron. As a result, this left a gap in home air defence back in the UK, not helped by the delays found in the Tornado air defence variant programme, as well as the high fatigue expended on RAF Phantoms over the many years of service in the ground attack role. Very similar to the Buccaneer, which I covered in the last video. The MOD decided to order some more aircraft for the Royal Air Force, and these would be not the modified British versions with spays. The new buys were off-the-shelf F4Js that had been retired from US naval service not long ago. Some minor modifications were made, but the J79 engines remained. Officially called Phantom F3s in UK service, this name did not stick. They were much more commonly called F4J UKs. 1988 rolled around and many Phantom units were gradually being whittled down in size as the Tornado air defence variants were entering service. The last Lightnings standing at RAF Brynbrook were also retired and replaced with Tornadoes. 43 Squadron and 111 Squadron would soon follow in this way, and the Phantom fleet was fast approaching its end of life in British service. The 90s sauntered into view, and by now many Phantoms were too tired to fly and found themselves grounded and gutted for spare parts. January 1991 saw the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, and it was hoped that the Phantoms would get their second chance of busting up some baddies, but this was not to be, as they were relegated to the important but more mundane task of defending Cyprus. No baddies were to be bagged for the Phantoms. The Tornadoes may have gotten the more exciting deployment into Saudi Arabia, but they never got any bad guys either. Aircrew were always super competitive with one another, and so no ragging could be made this time around. The UK Phantom Force was down to its final 4 squadrons, all based out of RAF Wattisham. One after another, these squadrons were stood down, and the carcasses were left on the outskirts of the base, marked with big blue crosses to mark them as disused aircraft to the gaze of Soviet satellites. The final flight for UK Phantoms would take place on October 1st, 1992, when 24 Squadron performed one last formation flypast, leaving only the echoes of the past and silence at RAF Wattisham. The final chapter in the life cycle of RAF Phantoms was not a pleasant ending. For reasons beyond comprehension, the US stated that all UK Phantoms were only to be disposed of by government-led organisations, meaning a key part of British aviation history had been mauled into scrap, despite the wild gesticulations of museums all over the country begging to have one to show off. Miraculously, some models have escaped the scrapper's grip and found themselves happy homes on display around the country. For me, Phantom FGR2 X-Ray Victor 406 stands proudly at the nearby Solway Aviation Museum, along with various other aircraft including a Vulcan, providing a glimpse into the powerhouse of the UK's Cold War air power. If you'd like me to cover an aircraft of your choice, leave a comment below, and I'll certainly add them to my list. I really look forward to seeing some suggestions. Many thanks, happy landings, and see you next time.